I'll call the meeting of council to order. Apologize for the late start. We just needed a little recess from our previous meeting. I recognize that we meet on the traditional territory of the LHTAKO DENE, and for those council members who couldn't join us today, it was a very good day at what is now LHTAKO DENE Park, and a very heartfelt ceremony and revelation of the plans for that site. So it was very, very good. With respect to the agenda, we have the late items M1, M2, which are correspondence items that just came in today but are pertinent to the events of today. So we thought we'd put them in front of council because we don't meet next week. And then I believe on one of our reports there's a slight amendment, and I don't see Director Norburn here. So Ms. Hartley, if you could clarify.
The report provided by Byron Johnson was just an amendment to the resolution that planning recommended.
So we can speak to that during the presentation of that report. Okay. So the actual substantive agenda items are the late correspondence items. So with that, if I can have a motion to adopt the amended agenda. Councillor Elliott, so moved. Councillor Paul. All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. And then the adoption of the regular minutes of June 7th. Councillor Rudenberg, Councillor Vik, any questions or comments? All those in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Okay, and moving right into committee business, Executive Chair Summary Report, Councillor Vik.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This report is a little late. I just missed the deadline on the last council meeting, so some of the items in this report are long history, long ago. So I'll skip through some of it, and I'll deal in detail on some of the more relevant items. Regarding upcoming community engagement, what's most relevant is regarding the pool renovation consultation survey. It's been extended. It was to have expired by now, but at the last joint planning meeting, that window was extended by a month. So the public can still weigh in on the survey there regarding the pool renovation. Executive also weighed in on a airport hangar concept. We heard from Tetra Tech with the thrust of the argument for building a new hangar. The cost is significant, but we have to recognize that our existing operations building is aging out. So an approach that was brought forward was to have a combination and maybe treat it as a two-phase build, one phase being a new operations building and the other being a proposed hangar. And we saw lots of information about proposed businesses that could take advantage of this hangar. But the cost is significant. So staff are going to develop a grant proposal from BCAP to hopefully kickstart some phased approach in this idea. As well as looking into NDIT grants. Next, we looked at city hand washing stations. We discussed the need for that, and the bottom line is we don't think it's necessary, and there may be other ways to meet that need, such as disinfectant stations, other than hand washing stations. So staff are going to get back to the committee on what that looks like. Next, we looked at the Laborde Park shade structures, and this comes out of the survey work that was done earlier in the year regarding Laborde Park, where feedback was clear that the community would like to see some shading in the park. So we reviewed two types of shade structures, and it was concluded that a smaller single-arm structure would be preferred. It's also more conducive to the budgeted dollars for the project, and it will leave enough room for 3 installations of 3 sun shelters. We also discussed locations for those shelters. And then on the same topic, we also discussed the new trail and the route for the trail from the visitor center around the arena precinct, and we agreed on that. Then we moved into agriculture and food security discussion, and we acknowledge that there seems to be some overlap between the CMHA and the Green Hope Society. They're both doing similar work in the community. With that said, there was a meeting held on June 9th, and I apologize, I don't know what the outcome of that meeting was, but it was going to bring all service providers together with some feedback on delivering food service in that context. And I'm not sure what the outcome of that meeting was. Unfortunately, Manager Reid isn't available to comment on that. But that will be reported out soon. Then we moved on to the West Quesnel Land Stability Public Meeting, which of course, from all accounts, was very informative. It was already held. And then we heard a First Nations update, and the culmination of that update was today's great announcement. So that was great news today. And then the pickleball and tennis courts, of course, that has already resulted in a council decision to move forward with that project. And that's all I've got. Thank you very much.
Great. Councillor Rinberg, you attended that meeting. Okay. We will get an update, as the chair indicated, on the food security. And I've also had an outreach from a potential private sponsor for the court's lighting that may come with some funding as well. They're looking for a community project. It's all on the QT just now because it's a corporate thing, but the bike park and the pickleball tennis court lighting were one of the two that they were interested in. So I'll keep council posted as that evolves. Councillor Paul?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. With regard to the shade structures for Labordi Park, are these a type of structure that would be removed and put in storage for the winter?
Correct, Councillor Paul. They're designed to be unfurled and put away in the wintertime to save wear and tear.
Okay, any other questions for Councillor Vik? Seeing none, then Councillor Elliott on our Finance Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is a report for FSAC from the June 1st meeting. Topics discussed, one of them was the 5-year capital plan surrounding, really the discussion was around the Johnson Bridge. Changes to the capital plan will likely have to be made if the grant funding is obtained for the Johnson Bridge. There are different options that will absolutely be explored. FSAC will be looking at it in late 2022. And if we receive early notice of the grant, work can be done to the 2023 capital plan, whether the grant is obtained or not. If the grant isn't successful, we could go to referendum to use debt for the bridge. Another topic was bonding and the potential for a policy on that. We talked about the need for bonding on each project the city undertakes or not. It's important to be very transparent to everybody involved and accountable because these are big ticket items potentially. Not every product should or will be bonded, and staff is going to bring a report forward so we can have further discussion around that. The Finance Department update, they're just extremely busy right now with tax collection coming in. And then we've been talking about how we can have conversations with the next elected officials and the next FSAC committee and advice that we would bring forward to them. So a couple of different things here is a deep dive into the capital plan next year to really understand the full scope of the various projects and timing. So just keeping everybody informed if and when we do have new elected officials. A review of the operating budget to determine if more room can be made for funding for the capital budget. Consideration to how much inflation needs will be built into the future budgets due to uncertain times, and this is a huge thing, as everybody's aware, with the inflation taking place, and to look at creating another 4-year tax framework at the beginning of their term. Our next meeting is going to be September 6th. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Elliott. Any questions or comments for Councillor Elliott? Councillor Paul?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. When we're submitting our application for grant funding for the Johnston Bridge, I'm sure we would be advancing the argument that that bridge is a shared regional asset as compared to just a municipal asset.
Yeah, every argument that we can make about why it should be funded will be made. We had a meeting with the Minister of Transportation yesterday, ongoing conversation about the interconnector. And as Council passed a resolution when we passed the motion to put the grant in for this, to seek assistance from the province on our portion of the project. And the Minister actually voluntarily suggested that we need to put something in front of him because of the nature of that bridge being a regional asset. So we didn't actually ask that question in the meeting. He volunteered it himself, and I'll be following up with him both now by way of a letter and then at UBCM. We're just, tomorrow I'm spending most of the day writing the minister briefings for our UBCM meetings, and that'll be part of UBCM as well. Okay? Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, thank you, Councillor Elliott. Moving on to our first staff reports then. Director Turner on the Motherlode car wash.
Thank you, Mayor. The purpose of this report is to consider a request to waive the requirement to provide additional screening along the rear lot line of an abutting property to DP 2022-41, the Motherlode truck wash development. The request for the waiver is attached as an appendix. To just summarize what this is regarding, a development permit was issued in 2002 with the condition to establish an adequate screening buffer abutting residential property from the proposed car wash and truck wash. Back in 2002, it was a car wash and truck wash proposed. Following issuance of the DP, noncompliance was discussed until about 2008 during a new development application on the site for an oil loop station when the truck wash did not proceed. Screening was added to the site at that time, although it was, there's two sections of screening that you can see in the ortho photo. There's a corrugated section, which was added sometime in 2008, following the oil lube development and the request to extend that fencing. Two sections on additional were added to the sides of the screening, which are, in one case, abutting the property, is pushed back an additional measure to about the property line and reduced in height. The new request for a truck wash then brought up the concern about making that screening more adequate in terms of height and buffer distance, and that was what was recommended by staff for that section of screening to be enhanced. So just by way of background, the condition at the time of the 2002 development permit was the subject property abuts a residentially zoned property on the proposed development east boundary. To mitigate any potential impacts such as car headlights and vehicle noise, screening in the form of fencing will be required along the east boundary of the proposed development. The work was not completed, and there was a history of notices to try and get resolution to that effect. The reduced screening that was added following the oil lube was allowed at that time because the oil lube was a further distance from the property line and was considered to would have less impacts on the abutting residential property than would the truck wash. So again, when the truck wash did come to council a few weeks ago, the recommendation from staff was that section of screening be enhanced. But you'll see the property owner is feeling that that's an extension and would like council to reconsider it. It should be noted that although we were talking just an additional couple meters, and the proponent has stated that maybe that's not sufficient, in many communities an engineer is required to give a proposal on what would completely buffer the screening for these types of developments. Heavy-duty commercial trucks next to residential would certainly fall into that category. At this time, we were only requesting sort of the additional to sort of appease the budding property owner that has felt that the screening was not to par over the years. So the recommendation from staff is that council direct the property owner that the following condition of DP 2022-41 remains a requirement. Completion of adequate screening in the form of fencing along the property line to minimize noise and sound impacts to the abutting residential property to the east. And fencing along the property line must increase to a minimum of 3 meters with final height to be approved by city staff. The screening must be updated and installed prior to the start of construction of the building.
Okay. Council? Councillor Paul?
Yeah, thank you. To staff, what is the height of a fence or screening that's required in the zoning bylaw in this particular instance, where we've got a commercial property that abuts onto a residential property?
The zoning bylaw has minimum requirements for screening, for heights, minimum requirements. It's not maximum requirements. So I think you're asking for the minimum.
Okay. So I take it that we are requiring a 3-meter high fence screening, but the zoning bylaw doesn't require that it go that high. Am I correct?
The zoning bylaw would specify a specific heights that would be minimum requirements for screening, but to the extent that they should properly screen the mitigative the impacts of between the developments. So it only prescribes a minimum.
No, you can't come up.
But regardless, both of these projects were developed under a development permit, and that development permit provides conditions as to which development is the resolutions as to what the development is to develop to, and that's what it's supposed to develop to.
So I hate to belabor this, but I went up and looked at it, and it seems like it's sort of higgledy-piggledy, like the elevation of the top of the screening seems to vary. Are we requiring that the top of the screening be consistent throughout the entire length of the property line?
That was the minimum request, yes.
Councillor Elliott and then Councillor Runge.
Yeah, quite honestly, if I was living in the residence that was there on the other side from Motherlode, I would want a barrier for sure. So this was one of the stipulations that was put forward originally, and it wasn't met. So I'm confident with the recommendation. You mentioned most cities would bring in an engineer to look at this. I think that would be a lot more expensive than just doing this. I think this is the right thing to do.
Councillor Runge.
Thank you. For me, it's unfortunate that the proponent missed our meeting there a few weeks ago on May, I guess it was May 10th or somewhere around there. Anyway, with regards to the 3-meter height, at our last meeting there, we actually passed that motion. So I think, and I also did drive up today to check it out, and I really do appreciate. I see that there's been a bunch of trees planted, so to add extra sound barriers in the future on the Motherlode side of it. So I think they're going to actually grow up to be actually great sound barriers. I believe that we should stay with the 3-meter height, because that's what we all agreed on about 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago. And it's just a section of the fence, I think, that has to be updated to the 3 meters. And the rest, like I say, I drove up in the picture here, because I wasn't sure about that, because I thought I saw trees up there. So I drove up today to see, look at it, and I think it's going to look quite nice after, once that goes up and those trees go bigger. That height will actually meet Councillor Paul's, fear of it not being high enough.
Okay, Councillor Vik.
So regarding the existing fences, and I'm not an engineer, but is it for cost savings context, is it practical to retrofit a fence to be a little bit higher? Or in your assessment, Director Turner? Or are we talking a new fence here?
My understanding is that probably the section of fence that's lower would have to be added on to a newer fence.
Okay. And then in terms of the principle of a fence, I think with such a robust business here, with obviously more traffic coming through it, which is going to be good for business and good for people that own trucks and whatnot, I think in the spirit of having good relations with your neighbor and the potential of having more noise, which is inevitable, I think if that fence can be somehow corrected rather than replacement, I think that's an affordable compromise.
Okay. So Councillor Elliott moves the recommendation. Any seconder? Councillor Rudenberg second. Any further discussion or deliberation? Seeing none on the recommendation, all in favor? Any on opposition? Councillor Paul opposed? Okay, thank you. And Ms. Penner, these are not open meetings and discussions, and so it's just a council deliberation. Next report, annual drinking water report, Superintendent Law.
Thank you, Mayor Simpson. The purpose of this, the purpose of the annual drinking water report for the City of Quesnel is to describe the water system and provide a summary of water management, including testing results during 2021. The report is required under the drinking water regulations by the Drinking Water Protection Act. A copy of this report and the monitoring results will be made available to the public at City Hall as well as placed on the city's website. There are no recommendations. This report's brought forward for information only.
Great. Questions or comments on our annual drinking water report? Councillor Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Question to staff. Over time, year to year, are the exceedances, such as manganese and bacterial levels, et cetera, are they increasing or are they remaining relatively static?
I believe they remain relatively static. Coliform exceedances are handled on a case-by-case basis. They're resampled, and then typically the next sample is clear. Maybe I'll.
Yeah, if I could just add to that too, as far as the manganese goes, our manganese, it's found at the source, so the manganese levels are in the wells, so which is, of course, ends up in the distribution system. So unfortunately, one of our newer water wells, which is, it's well over, I believe it's about 10 years old now, it's one of our higher producers of manganese, but it's also one of our newest wells, which is also our largest volume of water producer.
Could I just a supplemental to that? Like, we never heard about years ago the manganese problem, but is that exacerbated by virtue of the fact that the tolerance levels have changed and that really the quantity of manganese in the water really hasn't changed?
Yeah, that's correct. The water is the same. It's just the regulations have changed. So back in 2019, it was on the 2019 forward reports is the Canadian drinking water guidelines. The manganese never did have a maximum allowable concentration. There was only an aesthetic objective because of staining on fixtures, etc. So Health Canada developed a limit, and we exceed that. And many communities, in BC do. With that said, most communities have some form of treatment or manganese removal.
Thank you.
And currently, just for clarification, we do inform the public that we have potentially high manganese content, and that's all that we're required to do at this point. Is that correct?
We were recently inspected by Northern Health, so they have placed an advisory on our system, which is very similar to what we released to the public back in 2019 and through subsequent reports. We've been working on a plan for preliminary manganese removal, and it has taken quite some time just due to the pandemic, et cetera. One fortunate aspect of that is it has given us more time with our water wells project, as of course we've put in an application to increase our pumping levels, our pumping volumes from our wells, which bodes well from a manganese removal perspective because we have a lot more data on our wells and our water availability.
Yeah. Okay. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And just for clarity, so Northern Health's response to manganese is getting a little bit more, actually, I don't know the best word to describe it, but they're getting more and more insistent that the word gets out to the public because they do see the risk around the manganese. So as of this week, that water quality advisory will be made public, and there's a press release going out about it. And you may hear more discussions about the manganese in the water. And it's from Northern Health's perspective, we're the water providers. It's our responsibility to try to figure out how to deal with this. We've been doing what we've been trying to do with urban systems to figure out the solutions and come up with a timely solution that we can find grant funding for. So that's the track that we're on, and we've been doing that, and Northern Health recognizes that. But on the other hand, as the regulators, they are getting more and more insistent that we're doing something. So it's becoming, as an issue, manganese is increasing in importance to Northern Health.
And that's the point I want to clarify for the public, though. At this point, we are just being asked to communicate, right? That's our job, is to communicate that manganese levels can cause health hazards, and that we have high manganese in some of our water sources. We are not being compelled to expedite looking at treatment or to deal with it, just to communicate. But we're doing our due diligence should we be in a situation where we start to get compelled, or there's, it looks like we're going to get compelled. We've got that, because at that point, as a council, we don't have $20 million or $25 million in our back pocket, right? So right now we're still kind of in the same situation, but maybe a little bit more compulsion to communicate more directly. The one comment I would make, though, is I have heard over the last 2 years at least, and I think it could be related to the volume flow, less complaints about manganese than I've had in a long time. The browning of, brown bathtub water, things like that. So that seems to have diminished. Is there a reason for a reduction in those complaints?
No, not that I'm aware, not that I know of. Joe, you have anything to add?
The large disturbances like the browning of water you're talking about are mostly caused by the heavy demand on the system or changes in flow. Yeah. And I mentioned those in the report. They're handled by flushing and on a case-by-case basis. So other than flushing, I guess, no other reason.
Yeah, I think it's a testament to the fact that we are trying to be a bit more proactive in managing the water system. Because if you can remember, one of the hotels just across from us here, we were struggling like crazy with them, and you would get the odd springtime where you would just get nothing but phone calls. That seems to have diminished. So I think there's some proactive management going on there as well. So, okay. Thank you. Any further questions or comments on the drinking water report? It's an information-only report for council. Seeing none, we'll move on. Thank you, Joe. Okay, next, the development permit review for 1394 Highway 97.
Thank you, Mayor. This is a form and character development permit review for the North Commercial Area, Highway Commercial Area. The proposed proponent is proposing a freestanding deck that is to be about 111 meters squared and will be sited along the north and east side of the property. There's no variances with this application. The deck is intended to display interior showroom products and various other products. There's no issues with respect to the zoning analysis. This does not further compromise an existing nonconformance. The OCP analysis in terms of the form and character review states that shows that the construction is in compliance with some key factors in the DP review, such as the guidelines for using wood materials. The exterior building also should be selected for functional aesthetic quality, and we believe that the materials such as the metal, wood, glass are being used are compliant with this. One thing to note is that there is a section of the deck that is currently being proposed to be removed. The building inspector is in conversations with the proponent on how this is to be done. There is some building code stuff, but we don't expect that to affect the overall form and character, so that's why we're saying that this should proceed and they can work that out at the building stage. For that aspect. Staff is supporting this proposal. The recommendation is that council approve DP 2022-44 for the construction of a 111 meter squared freestanding deck on Lot 3, District Lot 346, Cariboo District Plan, BCP 41144, 1394 Highway 97 North.
Councillor Vik, so moved. Councillor Runge, second. Any further questions or comments of staff? Seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Thank you, staff. Okay, next, the annual report. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The purpose of this report is to provide any public submissions to council regarding the City of Quesnel 2021 annual report and for council to approve the attached report. First off, may I just recognize Tian, our communications clerk, for doing an outstanding job with the annual report. It presents a lot of initiatives in a very clear, easy to read manner, and it's great information for the public. So I would recommend, as you did in your column a few weeks ago, Mayor, that the public should latch onto this and read it, because I think they could learn a lot about the city. I'm not going to go through the sections in detail. Council has seen most of the component bits and pieces as they came forward, so this just compiles them all together. I will say that we did receive no comments or submissions while this report was out there available to the public prior to this meeting. So at this point in time, I would, unless council has questions on it, I would just recommend that council approves the 2021 annual report for the City of Quesnel as attached to this report. Thank you.
Councillor Elliott, so moved. Councillor Runge, second. Questions or comments? Councillor Runge.
Yes, thank you. I'm sorry I didn't miss this before. On page 11 of the report, page 59 of 120 of our document, in the last paragraph, I would love to include that the LHTAKO, DENE, and the city were selected to host the BC Games, so we had both the partners in there.
Yeah, we can change the online.
Sorry about not catching it earlier.
Councillor Paul.
Thank you. With the exception of the little glitch that Councillor Runge brought up, I just want to say that this report is very thorough, very professional, and complete. And it really is an excellent reflection of who we are and what we are as a community. And it, to the reader, it makes an excellent marketing tool as well.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? So on the motion, all in favor? Any opposed? Motion is carried. Okay, next up, the Floodplain Management Bylaw, Director Turner.
Thank you, Mayor. The purpose of this report is to introduce a draft floodplain management bylaw, which was number 1922, for council to consider, which is to replace the existing floodplain bylaw 1187. This report is meant to outline the major changes in the new bylaw. By way of background, in March, staff took this on for a detailed report to the Policy and Bylaw Committee discussing the changes required and the various options for consideration. The current management bylaw was adopted in 1991 and was adopted to reduce the risk of loss of life, damage to buildings within the flood-prone areas. In 2020, the city updated our floodplain mapping. The city, through an EMBC grant, updated our floodplain mapping, and it is included as the new floodplain schedules to this bylaw. But the bylaw was also in need of a great deal of repair. You'll see I have asked my planning technician to be here tonight, and that's because he did a heck of a job in terms of researching this bylaw and researching all of the new needed requirements, and and helping us formulate this new bylaw. The bylaw we discuss. I'm going to just get right into the, because this is a healthy report, but I'm just going to talk and direct our attention to the changes. So updated in the floodplain management bylaw include the section for general exemptions. As mentioned, general exemptions are broad exemptions that are mainly used to vary the flood control levels requirements across the floodplain. So we have included in this bylaw some general exemptions. These are very typical for communities. We researched a number of communities as well as recommendations from the province, and these are the general exemptions that we have landed on for our bylaw, which include exemptions for carports and garages, accessory buildings, recreation shelters and outdoor washrooms, renovation of existing buildings that do not change the footprint, additions to existing legally non-conforming buildings, and crawl spaces. In addition, we have included some site-specific exemptions. Site-specific exemptions previously were only allowed to be permitted by the Ministry of Environment. That changed, and they passed that down to us. A few years ago, this bylaw finally gives us the tools and the parameters under which we will consider those site-specific exemptions. The new floodplain bylaw is the recommendation is to accept site-specific exemptions where the applicant would need to supply professional recommendations. A flood hazard assessment report written by a qualified professional would be required. Registration of a covenant would be required, absolving the city of liability, and we have also included that any other requirements as required by the approving officer would be required for these types of site-specific exemptions. In addition, and of particular note, one of the big changes to this bylaw is the watercourse definition for Baker Creek. Floodplain Management 1187-1991 considered the Baker Creek a small creek. Unfortunately, it does not meet the definitions and requirements of the province for what a small creek is. As per the provincial guidelines, this reduction of setback and construction level can only take place if a watercourse has no significant history of flooding or erosion, if designated flow has a discharge of less than 80 meters cubed per second and is deemed appropriate by the approving officer. Baker Creek does not meet these objectives, and so needed to be upgraded to an ordinary watercourse. This does change. It's required setbacks and flood construction levels will also apply for that. Probably the setbacks are going to be the biggest change for properties that abut the Baker Creek area. There's a couple of items of future policy that we also identified in this review, and I'm just noting them here. These are not included in the current bylaw. We don't believe we're ready to move on these yet, but we want to have them just open for discussion. That's with regards to standard dikes. Standard dikes are regularly maintained by the province. The city does not have any standard dikes. The floodplain management bylaw 1922 does not specifically reference standard dikes as such, but if standard dikes are constructed within the city, the bylaw would then need to be amended to include such regulations. One of the reasons why we didn't do this and add this policy in there right now is there is a lot of old dikes that were constructed on a temporary basis, and people still think that they exist as functioning dikes. So we wanted to be clear that that's not the case, and make sure that we didn't have specific policies that people might confuse a right-of-way of a dike that to be an actual dike. Development downstream of dams. This is with respect to the Dragon Lake Dam. It's rated as having a high consequence level if the dam fails, as determined by Flynn Road, and as some areas of Johnson Sub would be at risk if it failed. The province guidelines state that if additional development takes place downstream of dams, this may increase the consequence level. This is something we'll have to keep an eye on with respect to the planning department. The Director of Capital Works and Infrastructure will obtain a new dam safety review report next year. At that time, we've been in discussions, and he's going to have a refreshed look at risk and policy for this area, have the contractor do that, which will assist us with a new policy if required in that area. Would you like me to open it for questions before I go into the recommendation, Mayor?
Yeah, let's just have some questions. We'll deal with the bylaw in the bylaw section, but there is a request here for council to pass a recommendation with respect to public notice. So, question, Councillor Paul.
Thank you to staff. I was paying very close attention to what you were saying regarding Baker Creek. But what about Dragon Creek? The back end of my property has flooded twice this spring, and I'm pretty confident that it's relative to when the floodgate on Dragon Lake is open, because the flooding lasts only for a day or two, and then it dries up, and then all of a sudden it floods again. So I'm wondering, why wouldn't Dragon Creek be considered as sort of an extension of the floodplain mapping?
There is definitely requirements. That area is in the floodplain. So the bylaw itself, there is mapping that doesn't include, you're right, the mapping doesn't include Dragon Creek, but there's parameters within the bylaw that say a certain distance from any water course. Yeah, and so Dragon Creek does have flood construction levels for sure, and does have requirements for floodplain.
So if I may, like when I look at the map, it says on Dragon Creek, it looks like that the floodplain is dictated by the level of the Quesnel and Fraser River, and there's a line there that clearly says end of study area, which is downstream from where I am.
The mapping has always just included the major rivers. It has not included the minor tributaries. This one, our new mapping does do more with Baker Creek, but it has not extended to minor tributaries, which this would be considered. But the bylaw and the policy still cover areas such as Dragon Creek, and definitely it's considered a floodplain. In fact, there's a floodplain marker not just far from your house.
Councillor Runge.
Thank you. So a question of staff. So with the changes on Baker Creek, I guess the question is with regards to property owners that might be within that floodplain now that have built there many, many years ago, in the event of a flood, would they then kick in that they're not able to rebuild, reconstruct things under Section 5 without... I'm just not sure how this affects the property owners there in the event of, let's say, a minor flood where they have to fix something.
It would have no consequence in that case.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Councillor Vik.
Just to add on to Councillor Runge, in the event, though, a rebuild is required, then that's different.
Correct, and we would want them to build to floodplain conditions.
Any other question? Councillor Runge.
Sorry, I just question my question is actually with regards to the bylaw. Do we speak to the bylaw questions now or later? 10.3, page 95 of 120. So I understand the provisions there with regards to offenses and the, the provisions of not meeting or not conforming to the bylaw. But 10.3, does that mean, is that an add-on to 10.2? So if I were in an infraction of $10,000, would I increase by 10,000 every day?
That is what is intended.
So then my question to you is there a maximum?
There's no maximum stated.
I just feel uncomfortable with that portion, that's all. Thank you.
These are these provisions are in just about every bylaw I've ever seen. They are sort of these are not fines. These are the provisions when we take somebody to court because there's been an extraneous circumstance. That it's meant to help the court penalize.
Yeah, it's pretty standard language. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry, just as clarification, I thought it was a fine, so this is much different. Thank you.
Okay, anything else? So I'm going to suggest, just because it's a little bit odd for us to not take the bylaw to first, second reading, we'll come back and revisit the public posting just as part of the bylaw passing. So I'll bring us back to public notification after we've voted the bylaw. So if there's no further questions on this, we can move on. We'll deal with the bylaw in the bylaw section. Okay, so over to the city manager for the extreme heat risk management planning grant.
Be careful what you wish for. So the purpose of this report is to receive council approval to apply to UBCM's Community Emergency Preparedness Fund for extreme heat risk mapping, assessment, and planning grant. And this is to do a joint project with the City of Williams Lake and the District of Hunter Miles. So the thought process is, if we're going to get a consultant in to help us, it makes sense to amalgamate the three communities and do one larger project, although it will be looking at each community specifically, so it's not one kind of generic type of a solution. So the grant will fund a project which will help us to map extreme heat and understand our community risks more accurately between now and the 2080s, including mapping areas, population structures, or assets at risk. We'll also complete a risk assessment of the social, economic, and environmental impacts of extreme heat events and create a plan for response and risk reduction for future heat events. So this grant is available for $30,000, covering 100% of the cost. So we will work together. This is will be administered by the City of Williams Lake. And the recommendation is that the Quesnel City Council approve a joint application to the UBCM Extreme Heat Risk Mapping Assessment and Planning Program for their local government share of $30,000 towards a $90,000 project, and further authorize the City of Williams Lake to receive and administer funds for the project.
Councillor Rudenberg so moves. Councillor Runge, second. Questions or comments? Councillor Paul.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wonder why the regional district isn't part of this, because, I mean, heat really knows no boundaries, and I'm just wondering why is it just the municipalities and not the entire CRD?
Thank you. I don't know the answer to that. Presumably, I believe the municipalities are more responsible for some of the larger infrastructure, what has the potential for housing people and heat extremists, such as rec facilities and whatnot. But as far as why the regional district, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I believe, to the city manager's point, the kinds of things that you're planning for is sheltering in place, how you're dealing with seniors. It's more of an urban-oriented phenomenon, and the answer for the RD, for example, would be bringing people into the urban centers, or a local solution of some kind. So I believe this is more of an urban-oriented grant. Okay. So on the recommendation, all in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Next up, the Quesnel Road closure and dedication removal bylaw. It sounds so ominous. Director Turner.
Thank you, Council. Yes, and this is a long report as well, but it just is a bit of housekeeping, Council, for the consolidation of the arena parcels. In 2015, Council reviewed and approved development permit package for the West Fraser Centre. The allowances and variances and encroaches which were permitted were based on the amalgamation of 5 parcels and a couple of segments of roadway. A few variances were also discussed and endorsed at that time. A decision to hold off completing the surveying and establishment of the new parcel until after construction was completed was made due to the construction removing the surveyor's posts and making it a bit difficult to complete, as well as it was determined that there might be some additional variances, et cetera, that might be required. In fact, some of the variances turned into full encroachments into the roadway, which is why there's some additional portions of the roadway that are obtained here for part of the parcel. This report is seeking to obtain authorization to complete the land tenure steps to create the intended consolidation. In order to consolidate the couple of parcels of land that are in the sole ownership of the City of Quesnel, these must be transferred to the joint ownership of the regional district. Approval from the CRD and City is required to make these transfers. We have received approval from the CRD. The following processes are required to complete the conveyances in this arena, for the arena. So we need to stop up and close portions of road needing to be added to the new amalgamated parcel and transfer ownership to the joint ownership of the Cariboo Regional District and the City of Quesnel. Notice will be issued for closure and road disposition. Provide authorizations to transfer the titles currently held by the city solely to the joint ownership of the Cariboo Regional District and City of Quesnel with the required resolutions and notice of disposition. Staff has drafted a notice that will cover both the disposition and the road closures that will be issued after approvals. Registration of the consolidation plan and then registration of the road dedications to create a lane over part of Lot 16 are required to meet the intended layout for the arena project. If there's no questions, I'll just go into the resolution. The recommendation is that Council authorizes the transfer of 1/2 interest in Parcel A, Town of Quesnel, Cariboo District, Plan PGP 45184 with PID 024723177, and Lot A, Town of Quesnel, Plan PGP 37668, PID 018527591 to the Cariboo Regional District, and that Council authorizes the transfer of 1/2 interest of those portions of roadway that are identified in the Road Closure Bylaw 1786 following the title being raised in the name of the City of Quesnel, and that Council approves providing the first 2 readings of Quesnel Road Closure and Dedication Removal Bylaw 1768 of 2022 under the Bylaw section of the agenda.
Councillor Ryan, so moved. Seconded. Councillor Vik. Any questions or comments further on this? Seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Okay, next, item 8, bonding construction reports.
Sorry. The purpose of this report is to discuss the various types of bonding that happens on construction projects and describe the risk management process taken by staff. So bonding requirements play an important role in protecting municipalities against potential contract defaults. Bonding requirements are essentially a type of insurance. Risk needs to be evaluated to determine the level of this type of insurance required, and there is a cost to this type of insurance. Risk is evaluated based on knowledge of the contractor, previous work done for the municipality by the contractor, essential level of the work being completed, and many other factors. And bonding doesn't not necessarily guarantee that a project goes off without issues. If there is a default, usually there's an investigation. It takes time for a claim. It could still result in legal action. A successful claim would lead to the bonding company determining how to resolve the situation, which could include trying to work with the original contractor, hiring a new contractor, the bonding company completing the project, or offering a payout. It is important that the city be transparent in its activities and ensure when taking on construction projects it's clear to all, including subcontractors, whether or not bonding is involved. For larger construction contracts greater than $500,000, bonding is generally used. In the rest of the report, I've described the different types of bonding as well as the builder's lien, just so council has an understanding of how that all works. And the recommendation is that council receive this report for information.
Thank you, Director Bolton. Questions or comments for council on this item, or for staff, rather? So just one comment, because we had quite a discussion about it as we were sort of weighing the pros and cons of putting a policy in place, requiring bonding, et cetera. We really need to give staff the latitude, and as Director Bolton has pointed out in here, I think the real lesson learned is greater clarity on whether a project is bonded or not bonded, but not to handcuff staff to say every project will be bonded, because in some cases it won't make sense, and in some cases it is so price plus as to make it very difficult for our ratepayers. I do want to say that in the situation that we had with Public Works, I think staff did a stellar job of protecting subcontractors. The minute they were made aware that there were any issues, and the way that they protected the subcontractors, I think, led to the best possible outcome in that circumstance. And so I want to give staff a big thumbs up for the work that you did to help our local contractors to get as much money out of that circumstance as they possibly could. So any further questions or comments? Councillor Paul?
Thank you. I just would like to ask if it could be, as a matter of policy, that on any bid or tender call, that we as the purchaser specify that or notify that the project is either either bonded or not bonded.
That's what I just said.
Okay, but
That's the lesson learned, is
I know, yeah.
that transparency and accountability will
So
be
what we're
made.
saying then is that would be disclosed in every instance.
Correct.
Thank you.
I just want to point out it would be disclosed, but in the RFP process, sometimes there would be negotiations, and in case if anything changed, we would have to make sure we disclose again to all involved. Yeah.
Yeah, and we've also got the issue of making sure that the prime contractor discloses to the subcontractors as well. So that's the lesson learned here, is that the communications piece needs to be tighter and needs to be as clear as possible to all involved. Okay? Any other comments or questions? This is an information-only report for council. Thank you. Next, the Breezeway. Director Turner.
Thank you, Council. The purpose is to obtain direction from Council on whether or not they would like to contribute to installing gates on the Breezeway on the 200 block of Reid Street. Following decades of being boarded up, the Breezeway was opened up to assist with the flow of pedestrians in and around the downtown during the Reid Street construction in 2016. During the review by the city's chief building official to reclose the Breezeway, as was promised to the owner, it was determined that this could not be done without significant changes to the building, as it was designed to have the open-air breezeway. Although the building owner did originally decide to reclose the breezeway, the upgrades required have not occurred, and the city cannot compel the building owner to complete this work. The owner has indicated that they do not intend to do this at this time. The owner is willing to have the city install the gates, but will not do so on their own accord. Staff has obtained a quote for the fabrication and installation of the gates as attached. The owner has requested has agreed that we would need to go into some kind of agreement for these gate systems, and also that we would want to talk about some of the store shops having access to the gates for access to the back. Obviously the reason, that council, that staff and the city is considering this whatsoever is due to some of the issues with respect to having this area reopened. The Breezeway is in a bit of a state of disrepair, I would say, as well as it does tend to attract some negative behaviors of people loitering in the area and consuming alcohol and drugs in that Breezeway, making it uncomfortable for a number of the downtown patrons. The business owners in the area, we did a survey a long time ago. They were really quite split about whether it should be open or closed. They did like having access to the rear of the building, but did all kind of note that these conditions and issues were a part of the the consideration of whether it should be open or closed. The gates came up this year following a number of reports by Bylaw of a number of issues that they were having and needing to address in that breezeway and regular calls to the breezeway. So staff, looked at it and decided what is this an option and is it something that we can go with. The only way to determine that was to bring a proposal to get an idea of what the cost would be and bring this proposal to council. Since this time, there's, we have been in discussion with the property owner who has that property up for sale. So that's a little bit of a twist on the proposal, and that's why part of the recommendation is worded as it is. I'm not 100% clear if council wished to go this way, and following council's endorsement of going this way, whether we'd want to proceed right away, depending on conversations with the owner and potential purchasers, what their intentions are in the future. The recommendation is worded that council directs staff to work with the owner to establish an agreement for the placement and use of the gates, and that council approves contributing up to $13,000 to the improvement of the space if staff feel an acceptable agreement can be negotiated. And so this includes us making sure that we don't want to put up these gates if it's not a long-term goal for any potential future owner.
Okay, what's the will of council? Councillor Paul, then Councillor Elliott.
Thank you. This is deja vu because I can remember many, many years ago when I was on staff and council passed a resolution to block it off, and I think that was at the request of some of the adjoining property owners. I know that there was a question of liability because it was basically private property, but being used by the public. I would have one question, and that is that if we were to put the gate in, when would the gate be open and closed? Would it be a matter of closing it at night, or just how would that work?
So we would actually be looking to have it closed all the time unless it was specified time. So unless we specified, and this would all be laid out in this agreement, who gets to decide when it gets opened and when. We would certainly put it, the city would be in agreement of when it gets opened. And the consideration would be if there's events downtown that we feel it's suitable to have the gates open. If there's going to be a very busy event that would occupy that space in the downtown, we think it would be appropriate to open them at that point.
Order, do we have a motion on the floor here yet?
You don't need a motion on the floor for having a general discussion. So staff indicated that they're seeking the will of council. And we have lots of general discussions without motions. Councillor Vik. Sorry, my mistake. No. Councillor Elliott I had on my list, and then Councillor Vik.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I work very close to this location, and I've on multiple occasions seen drug use, alcohol use for sure. I feel uncomfortable walking through there for sure at times. But another aspect of this is that it's often used as a changing room. So as far as theft is concerned, you can watch. I have seen on multiple occasions people coming out of my shop with stolen items, and they may be wearing a bright red ski jacket, run in that direction, and if you're quick enough, you can watch them do that, go onto Reid Street and see them come out immediately in a blue jacket. So they use that to dump all their clothes, have something else on, so it enables theft in the area, on a lot of occasions. So I would move the recommendation, and I also believe that it should just be closed at all times. I don't think it's a safe area at all.
So we have now a motion on the floor. Is there a seconder for the motion? Councillor Rudenberg, second. Councillor Vik.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And regarding the argument for public safety, absolutely, I'm in favor of this. And I appreciate your recommendation is flexible, but it seems to me that if there's an imminent owner who may acquire this building, shouldn't we wait to have a conversation with the new owner rather than spend $13,000 on a new gate?
That's why it's a bit flexible too. So we have been in conversations with potential purchasers. So it's hard to determine when that would ever happen, though, for sure. So at some point, with existing conversations we're having, we will sort of say, okay, look, we want to go. We'll be at a stage where we can kind of get a better idea from them if they intend to do anything with this space, and proceed on that matter. Truthfully, we could stay in this state forever, just waiting for someone to purchase it.
Okay, Councillor Runge.
All right, so then speaking to the motion, is it possible, because that's why I wanted to ask the question before, is it possible to split that motion into two portions? You know, 'cause speaking to Councillor Vik's point, I'm okay with working to establish an agreement. I don't think we should, I would rather hold off on the, say no to the contributing until we see what's going on, if there's a sale imminent or anything like that, because rumors abound, and I'm not sure whether, it's our place to say that, but splitting those up, like barring no, agreement, I'd be perfectly happy with doing that 13,000, but if there's an agreement imminent, I'd rather not be supporting a business to putting, I think that's a business, it's a business's responsibility to actually do this. I don't want to see the city, every time we have a safety issue at some place, that we come in and backstop it when it actually should be the business's owner's responsibility.
Okay, I'll let Director Turner speak to it, then I'll come back to the procedural issue. Go ahead, Director Turner.
Thank you. I guess the issue here is that we don't have a way to make them do it. We have no requirement for them to do this. So this would be for more of a public good type of discussion. Yes, and definitely when I'm talking about the agreement in the resolution, it's a developing agreement of how this would be the approval to, yes, we're having this gate on your property, and the permissions, as well as the layout of how it would be operated, etc. But definitely we will be making sure that we do not proceed if we determine that the owner and the potential purchasers, both of whom we're in contact with and in conversations with, there's going to be a change in the use, and we'll make it clear that we will only want to proceed if this is going to be something that they're going to want on this building.
So from the procedural perspective, Councillor Runge, you are free to ask for the two portions to be parsed, so they become two separate motions. That's standard practice under Robert's rules. In this case, the two are actually related, because the one says if we can come up with an acceptable agreement, and the second one is predicated on coming up with an acceptable agreement. But it's up to you. If you wish to have them parsed from each other, then that's an acceptable procedural process. So do you want them split?
Yes, I'd rather have. Yeah, I'd rather have them split if it's possible, if it's the will of the council.
So we can do them, they're two separate standalone statements, and when we vote them, we will vote them as split statements. Okay, Councillor Paul.
Thank you. A question to staff. Has the present owner, or I guess it could conceivably be a future owner, being given the opportunity to consider framing it in and capturing that as additional floor space for the existing building?
They have considered closing it up again, as the report states, and they have determined they themselves do not want to go in that direction. But we will make sure that if there's any potential new owners, that they're not wanting that they've considered that. The cost to do that will be fairly extensive, is my understanding.
Yeah, there's, Councillor Paul, if you read the report, there are substandard issues in there, lighting, electrical, et cetera. So it would be more costly to do anything along those lines than throw some gates up. So, okay. So any further questions or comments? Okay, so on the motion in the two parts, on the first part, council directs staff to work with the owner to establish an agreement for the placement and use of the gates. All those in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried unanimously. And then on the second portion of the motion, council approves contributing up to $13,000 to the improvement of the space if staff feel an acceptable agreement can be negotiated. All those in favor? Any opposed? Councillor Runge opposed? Okay, that motion has passed. Thank you, Director Turner. Okay, and our final report for the night, back to the city manager on the BC 55 Games co-host bid.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the city received an invitation to apply to co-host the 2026 55-plus games. It's a bit of an interesting request, because we received a letter saying, why don't you apply to host these games? But when you read the rules, we didn't qualify to host those games. So it was a little bit frustrating. So staff has been working with the executive committee on how we shape this to see if we can still salvage some of the value out of these games, because the BC 55 games is a bit of a different set of games than the BC Winter Games. The BC 55 Games, as its name implies, attracts older athletes, and they come into town and they spend more money. They don't bill it at the schools. They typically use hotel rooms and they use restaurants, and that. Interestingly, that's why we didn't qualify, because we didn't have enough of our own hotel room space in town, hotel room and RV space in town to host the games on our own. But because of that, people actually clamor to get these games, because it is more of an economic boost to the economy, the BC 55 games. So the city of Quesnel, on the recommendation of the Game Society, it was recommended that we work with another proponent. So we've been in discussions with the city of Prince George, who seem quite to like the idea of actually doing a co-host situation. So the city of Quesnel would take on, looks like 7 of the 20 sports. And those proposed sports in Quesnel would be curling, archery, mountain biking, triathlon, swimming, karate, and cribbage or whist. So those sports would be held in Quesnel, or very similar to that list of sports. It would be a co-hosted event with the only joint ceremonies would be the opening ceremonies in Prince George. Other than that, the Quesnel participants would be in Quesnel for the duration of the games. This actually has appeared before council, but as part of our joint planning session on June 14th. And joint planning actually passed the resolution which covered off the funding aspects. And that funding aspect was a $20,000 cash donation and an $18,150 in-kind donation. And the resolution included those into the 2026 sub-regional rec budget, of course, still subject to approval by the CRD board. So the only thing we're asking from council at this point in time is that council approves applying for the 2026 55-plus BC Games in partnership with the city of Prince George. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a couple of quick points of clarification. These truly are games, given the nature of some of the activities that occur, as opposed to the winter games, which are all sports. These are games in the truest sense of that word. And then the other piece, in terms of the legacy funding, if you take a look at that, it's substantially lower than what your normal legacy funding would be for BC sports-oriented programs. But the real legacy here is the profiling of our community and the commercial, economic benefits that you get from a games like this. These are individuals who, as the city manager indicated, travel, stay in our community, but they also, spend as well. So that's the true legacy of this kind of game. So on the recommendation, Councillor Runge so moved. Councillor Vik, any questions or comments? Councillor Elliott.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, with your indulgence, because it is just embedded in the background in the second to last paragraph. First of all, I'm fully in support of this, but we always talk, okay, Tourism PG has access to software to estimate economic impacts. We often talk about the multiplier effect in Quesnel on different events. I'm just curious if maybe we can look at the possibility of obtaining this kind of software down the road.
I think our app manager, economic development, could certainly look at that. The other piece that's come out of this has stimulated a dialogue because Prince George does host many events, and it stimulated a dialogue about maybe this is a pattern that we could look at as well, because they'll often have venues that don't meet the test or not as easily accessible as venues we may have, et cetera. So it started that dialogue of maybe this is the beginning of something that we would do on an ongoing basis. So, okay, Councillor Runge.
Yeah, just as an aside, do we get cribbage lessons too?
You can sit in and watch over people's shoulders. So, okay, anything else on this? On the motion, all in favor? Any opposed? And we'll see Councillor Runge on the cribbage team in 2024. Okay. Next, then we're moving on to SIP, and it's already been received. No items were brought forward. So on Bylaw 1922, City of Quesnel Floodplain Management Bylaw, first and second readings. Councillor Run.
Late items M1 and M2.
Oh, thank you. I didn't write it in. Thank you. So we do have correspondence, the late items M1, M2 from Likely and District Chamber of Commerce and from the Likely Hatsul Community Force, both on the same topic, which is the repatriation of both the steam shovel and the steam pump from Seal Tingley Park to the Bullion Lookout site. There was a delegation from Likely at the renaming of that park today to LHTAKO DENE Park, and they were very excited about seeing these pieces of equipment come home. So we will be working with them. We'll be seeking some funding. I actually spoke with a Cisco after today's event, and again, they may be a partner in repatriating those to the bullion pit where they belong. So these are just pieces of correspondence to that effect. Okay, and I think because these were not on, they were late, we should just do a motion to receive, or do we receive them? Okay, thank you. Okay, so now moving on to the bylaws then.
Mr. Mayor, just
Yes,
a question
go
on that. Would it be possible, and maybe this has already been thought of, to have on the signage that accompanies the steam shovel a note rather that Quesnel has had a part in this, and this goes back in history where an old gentleman by the name of Jack Ives and several others brought that steam shovel to Quesnel in pieces and worked on it over a period of years to restore it, and I think that it would be appropriate to have some mention of the fact that Quesnel's involvement in this project.
Again, when you repatriate something, it becomes under the ownership of the people you give it back to. So we can certainly have that conversation with them. But at the bullion pit, if you've been there, is about the history of the bullion pit. So we can make mention of that in our discussions with them. Okay, now the bylaw on the floodplain management, first and second readings. Can I have a motion? Councillor Vik, Councillor Rudenberg. Any further questions or comments on this? All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. And then let's then do the motion that, let me just find it here. Council directs staff to post the proposed floodplain management bylaw for public review, advertise where it can be accessed, and provide a summary of comments at the July 26th council meeting. Councillor Rudenberg so moved. Councillor Elliott second. All those in favor? Any opposed? Carried. And then the Quesnel road closure and dedication removal bylaw, first and second readings. Councillor Runge so moved. Councillor Rudenberg second. Questions or comments? All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Thank you. No changes to upcoming meeting schedule or to committee appointments. Any announcements or future events? Okay, just from me, on Friday, we have a delegation of chiefs and staff coming up from the Silcotin Nations to visit the helipad and other properties up on the bench to have the discussion about the proposed War Chiefs Memorial Pavilion at that location. So that's an ongoing dialogue we have with them. And then Monday next week, we're looking at a smudging ceremony and a dedication of the amphitheater park with the chiefs, so that those projects, we get them cleaned up and get them ready for any rounds of funding that are coming. So those two projects will advance over the next 2 weeks. Councillor Runge.
Yes, thank you. And I believe that prior to our next meeting, we have Billy Barker Days on the third weekend of July happening here in Quesnel also.
Fingers crossed as we go into a heat trend. So yes, plans are afoot for that. Okay, any questions from the gallery? Seeing none, and we won't put Rebecca on the spot, then I'd invite a motion to adjourn. Councillor Runge, so moved. Councillor Vik, second. All in favor? Any opposed? Thank you, council. Thank you, staff.